Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for June through September. Currently, Great Basin fire activity is shown here. The purple fuchsia circles are our prescribed fire activity. Things are winding down, but there's still definitely some prescribed fires still occurring in parts of Utah and Idaho into Wyoming. The smaller red and yellow circles are our wildfires, current or recent, and we have had some smaller fires continue to pop up nearly daily across the geographic area, especially in the lower elevation in the grasses, and even a couple fires that did exhibit some growth for a burning period down in the far south in southern Nevada and also up into parts of southwest Idaho. Looking at the last 7 to 14 days across the Great Basin, you can see any of the precipitation has been focused in the north and eastern half of the region, with drier sections being western and central Nevada, down into southern Nevada, southern Utah, and into the Arizona Strip. But even the precipitation we have been seeing up north is still generally below normal in most areas, but there are some pockets of near normal conditions. Over the last 30 days, temperatures have been cool or below normal across the Great Basin for much of the time. There have been some warmer periods where temperatures have increased to above normal, but again, we've had some of those cooler systems move through to drop the temperatures, especially earlier in the 30-day period. Precipitation also has been well below normal across all of the Great Basin. Since the beginning of the water year, October 1st, precipitation is near normal or just above normal over parts of northern Nevada, southern Idaho, and northern Utah, also into western Wyoming. Other areas of the Great Basin have seen below normal precipitation. However, if we look from the beginning of January, we can see a little bit different of a picture with greater precipitation over southern Nevada, parts of eastern Nevada into Utah, and then also continuing up into Idaho and northern Nevada, and then even into the Sierra and western Nevada saw those above normal precipitation signatures anywhere from the midwinter through the current time. Currently, our snowpack is still above normal across much of Nevada and Utah, however, nowhere near where we were at this time last year. Further north, snowpack has continued to drop to below normal, even though we have been getting some new snowfall in some of the higher elevations of central Idaho. With a lot of the recent systems that have moved through, there's still quite a bit more melting going on in between these systems. So this snowpack will continue to melt and deteriorate here over the coming weeks into the next month. Looking at where this precipitation really matters, looking at the monsoon time period, which is over the summer, obviously, and then also looking at the other peak in precipitation, which is anywhere through the winter and spring. Depending on what location you are across the geographic area, really determines what precipitation is most important for fine field growth the next season. So looking at where monsoon rains matter, you can see in this image on the left, the darker blues and greens anywhere on the map are the indication of where precipitation during the monsoon season is most important for fine field growth the following year. You can see that a lot of that is important in the southwest, parts of Colorado, but also into parts of southern and eastern Utah, the Arizona Strip, and even a few pockets of eastern Nevada. But for the much of the Great Basin, you can see those orange or yellow colors, and those are really indicative of winter and spring precipitation being most important. So if we do look at these areas in Utah and parts of far eastern Nevada, you can see some areas of southwest Utah, the western portion of the Arizona Strip, did receive near normal or just above normal precipitation last monsoon season. So again, those areas could have seen some new fine field growth from those rains. Other areas of the Great Basin where winter and spring precipitation is most important, which is really much of Nevada into southern Idaho and even into Wyoming. And you can see, looking again at that period from January 1st, northern, western Nevada, parts of southern Nevada, those areas also across southern Idaho into Wyoming, all got precipitation when they needed it during the winter and spring months. So what about the last 2 years? Well, we've had definitely very wet conditions the last couple of years. Obviously, the current snowpack is here in the bottom right, so we have had above normal snowpack much of the season, and you just saw where the above normal precipitation was this last winter and spring. However, a year ago, the winter of going into the 2023 fire season, we had almost a historic amount of snowfall in some locations. Other areas were just well above normal. So we had, again, another 2 good years back to back of significant precipitation and snowfall in certain areas. So looking at that precipitation, you can see obviously 2022 going into 2023 was quite a bit wetter across much of Nevada, Utah, northern Arizona than it was this past year. However, we still, in many of those same areas, still had wet conditions this past winter and spring. And looking up at Idaho, we were definitely drier going into last fire season with respect to precipitation from the beginning of the water year, but we saw quite a bit more this year going into the season. So as you can see from the precipitation, either last year or the last 2 years, we have quite a big potential for fine field growth across the Great Basin in the lower elevations. Our soil moisture has been quite high through the spring. However, things are definitely starting to dry out. So we are getting out of our growth season and really turning the page into the more curing conditions. And then looking at our drought conditions, we still have really no drought across most of the Great Basin. Still some areas in central Idaho that have some either abnormally dry or small pockets of moderate drought. And then even over eastern and southern Utah, the Arizona Strip, and far southern Nevada, some abnormally dry conditions. But again, very minimal in those areas even right now. Looking at the drought outlook on the right, you can see we still have the potential of drought development a little bit further as we go into the fire season in central Idaho and in the far south. So that will come into play later this fire season, especially in the mountains of central Idaho. But further south, again, with the dry conditions and that drought development likely, it's just showing generally lower precipitation this monsoon season. So looking at how our drought compares to a year ago, you can see 1 year ago on the left, current conditions on the right. So last year at this time, we were seeing abnormally dry or moderate drought conditions in parts of the Great Basin, a couple of pockets of severe drought in southern Utah and southern Nevada. But then if we look at 2 years ago, obviously we were much deeper into drought. We had just started coming out of drought at this point 2 years ago, and that was after 3-4 years of significant drought. So it did take these last 2 years of the heavier precipitation we've seen both in the winter and spring and in the monsoon season to really alleviate those drought conditions. So now looking at what drought means across the Great Basin. Well, this is a schematic just for Nevada, but it's fairly representative of lower elevations across many areas of the Great Basin. This is showing our drought time series since the year 2000 on the left, going through 2024 on the right. And you can see all the years at the bottom, and we have usually 3-4 years of significant drought. Then we have a 2 or 3 year period in between where drought gets better or is eliminated altogether. And then we go back into a drought cycle, come out of it for a little bit, and then back into that 3-4 year period of drought. So you can see the cycles, and the black boxes indicate when Nevada burns well above normal or above median acreage across the state. So again, you can see where these black boxes are, and it's all in areas of no drought or when we're either coming right out of drought or going right back into drought. And again, you can see where we are here on the right. We're completely out of drought for the most part, so really setting ourselves up for an increased fire potential year, especially due to the fine fuels and the growth. Also, here are a few pictures of some experimental fine fuel conditions. These are from Matt Reeves, and these are from the FuelCast website. So the left image here is the estimate of standing dead fine fuel carryover into the season plus the 2024 fine fuel growth. And you can see the fuel loadings down here on the left. Basically, obviously anything in the greens and dark blues are higher fuel loading, both taking into account carryover and new growth. So again, some of the pockets of higher fuel loading are right in northern Nevada, especially in northeast Nevada, also across southern Idaho, into northern Utah, even into far southwest New Mexico, and also along parts of the foothills on the western side of the central Utah mountains, pockets down into near Caliente and St. George area, and then even over parts of northwest Nevada. So again, this is an estimate and showing fine fuel loading. If we look at some of our invasive species, the image on the right here shows the estimated invasive species coverage. So this is not fuel loading, this is just coverage, so maybe a better indication of fuel continuity. And you can see some of the higher percentages are really over western and northern Nevada, southern Idaho, and even parts of western Utah, even pockets down in southern Nevada. You can see that again near the Caliente area, western areas of the Arizona Strip, and even some pockets down near Red Rock. So again, this is more of an indication of continuity, not necessarily translating to fuel loading. So it just gives us an idea of, again, in the lower elevations, some of the hot spots that we are really paying attention to for that fine fuel growth, and once that growth cures out, for the increase in fire potential and quick fire spread in some of those areas. So looking at our fuel conditions, our 10-hour fuel moisture is really starting to dry out in the far south. We're seeing some areas that are probably right on the borderline of critical or have gone critical with their fine fuels. And then further north, we're definitely seeing more drying into Nevada, not quite as far north into Utah and Idaho and Wyoming, just with the storm systems that have moved through. 100-hour fuel moisture showing that similar trend, really seeing that drying over southern and western areas of the Great Basin. And then 1,000 hours really just starting to dry out in the far south. So putting everything together, if we look at La Nina and El Nino, kind of the state that we have been in and where we're going right now, we are back into a state of neutral, which is again near normal sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. The warmer conditions would be when we're in El Nino, and when the waters get cooler, we're in La Nina, kind of the areas in red and blue. So if you follow this line through time, you can see we will see cooling through the summer into the fall, and possibly may even see a return of La Nina later this fire season. So what that really means for us, a lot of times we see the influence on the weather in the winter months, and we have generally seen kind of wetter conditions, usually in the south, warmer and drier in the north. I wouldn't say we had a perfect scenario this past winter and spring, even though we were in El Nino. We didn't really see this pattern, but we did see it at times. It just wasn't very consistent because there were other atmospheric patterns that were really taking control of the weather, more so than El Nino and La Nina. But going into the fire season, we're still in this transitory pattern of some short periods of warm, dry weather and then storms continuing to move through. And that pattern likely will continue going into June. However, much of the track of these storms is going to be up north across the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies. So it will clip the Great Basin, bringing some precipitation to central Idaho going into the very first few days of June. Then we'll have a much hotter and drier period and likely a return of some moisture potentially to central Idaho. But really further south, we're looking at much drier and warmer conditions across much of Nevada, Utah, and even up into southern Idaho. Looking at the 8 to 14 day outlook, taking us from June 6th through the 12th, again, you can see much hotter conditions. We're really expecting these stronger ridges of high pressure to dominate the west. So hotter temperatures, lower relative humidity, less potential for precipitation across most areas. So what this will do for us is really accelerate the curing process across the Great Basin here for the next couple of weeks. So we will likely be transitioning from a mix of cured and non-cured grasses to probably all cured grasses by the end of June. And even many of our brush components will probably be into some of that critical threshold as we get later in the month. So really June will be a transition month, which will see the curing of those fuels, but also we'll see smaller fires continue to pop up, and we will even see, as each week goes by, probably more and more growth potential on some of these fires before we really hit the meat of the fire season. So looking at our outlook from June through September from Predictive Services, the top row is showing temperatures, and you can see generally warm conditions, especially throughout June, maybe some fluctuations in temperature in July going into August, but then warming again later in August and September. So really generally a normal or warmer type season. And then looking at our precipitation, really going anywhere from June, July, August into September, you can see more of a dry signature for the Great Basin. So again, this is as we're approaching our monsoon time period. So we've had pretty good monsoons the last 2 years in especially the western half of the Great Basin, but it does look like it's going to be a drier scenario going into July and August and possibly even into September. And here's a quick look at just looking at some past years that are very similar and some of the atmospheric patterns that are occurring right now, telling us in July, August, temperature maybe near normal, so still hot for the west, and precipitation still showing a drying signature during the peak monsoon months. So putting everything together, what this means for us, so for June, we are still only highlighting down in far southern Nevada, Red Rock, Spring Mountains, and then over into southern Lincoln County, over towards Caliente, and then even into far southwest Utah, going into color country. So these areas, some of them definitely have above normal fine fuel growth. Things should really be getting drier here in the coming weeks. And then if our monsoon season is either delayed or weaker or drier than normal, these areas might remain fairly active going into July. So June, again, much of the geographic area just in a transition period of curing of fuels, but by late June or certainly by July is where we really expect things to pick up.
Also, here are a few pictures of some experimental fine fuel conditions. These are from Matt Reeves, and these are from the FuelCast website. So the left image here is the estimate of standing dead fine fuel carryover into the season plus the 2024 fine fuel growth. And you can see the fuel loadings down here on the left. Basically, obviously, anything in the greens and dark blues are higher fuel loading, both taking into account carryover and new growth. So again, some of the pockets of higher fuel loading are right in northern Nevada, especially in northeast Nevada, also across southern Idaho into northern Utah, even into far southwest New Mexico, and also along parts of the foothills on the western side of the central Utah mountains, pockets down into near Caliente and St. George area, and then even over parts of northwest Nevada. So again, this is an estimate and showing fine fuel loading. If we look at some of our invasive species, the image on the right here shows the estimated invasive species coverage. This is not fuel loading, this is just coverage, so maybe a better indication of fuel continuity. And you can see some of the higher percentages are really over western and northern Nevada, southern Idaho, and even parts of western Utah, even pockets down in southern Nevada. You can see that again near the Caliente area, western areas of the Arizona Strip, and even some pockets down near Red Rock. So again, this is more of an indication of continuity, not necessarily translating to fuel loading. So it just gives us an idea of, again, in the lower elevations, some of the hot spots that we are really paying attention to for that fine fuel growth, and once that growth cures out, for the increase in fire potential and quick fire spread in some of those areas.